The morning sun cast
Let us
long shadows
proceed
across
with
the
the
polished
utmost
floors of Windsor
care
Castle
and
as King
wisdom.
Charles III walked slowly through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. 6 months had passed since his mother's funeral, yet the weight of the crown still felt foreign upon his brow. Each day brought new challenges, new decisions that would shape the future of the monarchy he had waited 74 years to lead. In his private study, overlooking the gardens where his mother once took her evening walks, Charles reviewed the endless stream of documents that required his attention. State papers, ceremonial arrangements, and constitutional matters filled his desk in neat piles, each one a reminder of the immense responsibility that now rested solely on his shoulders. His private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered the room carrying a sealed envelope that seemed to glow with an unusual importance. The elderly man's face bore an expression Charles had rarely seen during their years of working together, a mixture of reverence and barely contained excitement. "Your Majesty," Sir Clive began, his voice carrying the weight of momentous news. "The Queen's personal solicitors have completed their final review of Her late Majesty's private papers. They have discovered something that requires your immediate attention." Charles looked up from his correspondence, noting the tremor in his secretary's usually steady hands. In all his years of service, Sir Clive had maintained perfect composure through constitutional crises, family scandals, and matters of state that would have rattled lesser men. Whatever lay within that envelope possessed the power to disturb even the most experienced royal advisor. "What manner of discovery?" Charles asked, setting aside his fountain pen. The question hung in the air like morning mist, heavy with possibility and dread in equal measure. Sir Clive approached the massive oak desk that had served generations of monarchs, placing the envelope before his king with the reverence reserved for sacred relics. "A private codicil to the Queen's will, Your Majesty. One that addresses Prince Harry's situation in ways that none of us could have anticipated." The mention of his younger son's name caused Charles to stiffen involuntarily. The relationship between father and son had been strained for years, reaching a breaking point with Harry's departure from royal duties and subsequent move to California. Public statements had been made, interviews given, and wounds inflicted that seemed impossible to heal. The royal family had adapted to Harry's absence, restructuring their duties and public appearances around the reality of his permanent departure. Charles broke the wax seal with hands that betrayed none of the emotion churning within his chest. The paper inside bore his mother's distinctive handwriting, the same careful script that had signed countless state documents throughout her remarkable reign. But these words were different, personal, intimate, and filled with the wisdom of a grandmother who had watched her family fracture despite her best efforts to hold it together. The opening lines made Charles pause, his breath catching in his throat as he recognized the depth of his mother's insight into the family's private struggles. "My dearest Charles," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have departed this world, and you now carry the burden and blessing of the crown. I write these words in my final months, not as your queen, but as your mother, and, more importantly, as Harry's grandmother who loves him beyond measure." Charles felt his eyes grow moist as he continued reading, each word revealing layers of understanding he had not known his mother possessed. "I have watched our family struggle with Harry's choices, and I have seen how pride and hurt have built walls where bridges once stood. But I have also seen something else, a young man who inherited not only the Windsor determination but also the Spencer sensitivity, a combination that has always made him both vulnerable and extraordinary." The letter went on to detail observations the Queen had made during Harry's final years as a working royal, moments when she had witnessed his genuine dedication to service, his natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life, and his deep love for the institution he would eventually leave behind. "Harry's departure was not a rejection of our family or our values," the Queen had written. "It was the desperate act of a young man trying to protect what he loved most while staying true to his conscience. I failed to bridge the gap between his needs and our traditions, but perhaps in death, I can accomplish what I could not achieve in life." Charles set the letter down momentarily, rising to walk to the window where he could see the ancient trees his mother had loved so dearly. The weight of her words pressed down upon him, challenging assumptions he had carried for years about his son's motivations and character. The letter continued with practical matters, detailing a trust the Queen had secretly established during her final year. The trust, managed by a consortium of international lawyers and former royal advisors, contained a substantial portion of her private wealth, money that had never been part of the Crown estate or subject to parliamentary oversight. "This trust is designated specifically for Harry and his family," the Queen had written, "but it comes with conditions that I believe will serve both his happiness and the greater good of our monarchy." Charles read the conditions with growing amazement. The trust would provide Harry with complete financial independence, removing any perception that he might be profiting from his royal connections or trading on his family's reputation for personal gain. The funds were structured to support his charitable work, his family's security, and their private life in whatever country they chose to call home. But the most surprising condition was yet to come. However, the Queen's letter continued, Harry may only access these funds if he agrees to serve as a roving ambassador for the Commonwealth, representing the Crown in nations where his unique perspective and experiences would be most valuable. This role would require no formal reinstatement to royal duties, no return to the line of succession, and no compromise of the independent life he has chosen to build. Charles sat back in his leather chair, struggling to process the implications of his mother's final gift to her grandson. She had found a way to bring Harry back into the royal fold without forcing him to abandon the principles that had driven him away. It was a solution so elegant, so perfectly crafted to address everyone's needs, that only someone with the Queen's decades of experience navigating royal complexities could have conceived it. The letter concluded with instructions that made Charles's heart race with equal parts hope and apprehension. I have asked the trustees to reach out to Harry directly, but only after you have had time to consider these arrangements and provide your blessing as king. The choice must be Harry's alone, made without pressure from the family or obligations to the crown. If he accepts, it must be because he believes this path will serve both his conscience and his heritage. Charles looked up to find Sir Clive watching him intently, the older man's eyes reflecting the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that Charles felt in his own heart. Have the trustees been contacted? Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They await your instructions, Your Majesty. The Queen left explicit directions that nothing should proceed without your knowledge and consent as the reigning monarch. Charles stood and walked to the portrait of his mother that hung above the fireplace, studying the familiar face that had guided him through decades of preparation for this moment. Even in death, she continued to teach him about leadership, about the delicate balance between duty and compassion that define truly great monarchs. The question before him was no longer whether Harry deserved a second chance, but whether the monarchy could afford to pass up an opportunity his mother had so carefully orchestrated. The world had changed dramatically since Harry's departure, and perhaps those changes had created space for a new kind of royal service, one that honored tradition while embracing the realities of modern life. As Charles contemplated the weight of this decision, he realized that his mother had given him something far more valuable than a solution to the family's estrangement. She had provided him with an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership that put love and wisdom above pride and protocol. The morning light continued to stream through the windows of Windsor Castle, but, for Charles, everything had changed. His mother's final lesson was about to begin, and its first test would be a phone call to California that could reshape the future of the British royal family forever. 3 days after discovering his mother's secret codicil, King Charles found himself in the unprecedented position of preparing for a conversation that could alter the course of royal history. The weight of the Queen's final wishes pressed heavily upon his shoulders as he considered how to approach his estranged son with an offer that seemed almost too extraordinary to be real. In the privacy of his study at Highgrove House, surrounded by the organic gardens that had been his refuge for decades, Charles drafted and redrafted the words he would use. Each version felt inadequate to bridge the chasm that had opened between father and son over the past 4 years. The public nature of their estrangement had made private reconciliation infinitely more complex, with every gesture scrutinized by media outlets hungry for signs of healing or further fracture. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away in Montecito, California, Prince Harry was experiencing the quiet satisfaction that came with a life built entirely on his own terms. The morning routine he had established with Meghan and their children provided a peace he had never known during his years as a working royal. There were no pre-scheduled engagements stretching months into the future, no protocols dictating how he should spend each hour, no photographers waiting outside every restaurant or school. Yet beneath this contentment lay an undercurrent of loss that Harry rarely acknowledged, even to himself. The connection to his homeland, to the causes that had shaped his adult life, and to the family members who had once been his closest confidants remained severed in ways that troubled him during quiet moments of reflection. It was during one such morning, as Harry reviewed proposals for his foundation's latest mental health initiative, that his private phone rang with an international number he recognized but had not seen in months. The sight of his father's personal line caused his heart to race with the familiar mixture of hope and wariness that had defined their relationship for far too long. "Hello, Papa," Harry said, using the childhood term that somehow felt appropriate despite everything that had transpired between them. Charles's voice came through clearly across the distance, carrying an unfamiliar note of vulnerability that immediately caught Harry's attention. "Harry, my dear boy. Thank you for taking my call. I hope I haven't caught you at an inconvenient time." The formality of the greeting spoke volumes about how far they had drifted from the easy camaraderie of Harry's younger years, when father and son had found common ground in military service, environmental causes, and their shared commitment to charitable work. "I always have time for you," Harry replied, and was surprised to find he meant it completely. Despite their public disagreements and private hurt, the fundamental love between them had never truly disappeared, it had simply been buried beneath layers of misunderstanding and wounded pride. Charles cleared his throat, a gesture Harry recognized from countless childhood conversations when his father was preparing to discuss something particularly important or difficult. "Harry, I'm calling because something rather extraordinary has come to light regarding your grandmother's final arrangements. Something that I believe you should know about directly from me, rather than through official channels or legal representatives." Harry set down the papers he had been reviewing, giving his father his complete attention. Any mention of his grandmother still had the power to bring tears to his eyes, months after her passing. The Queen had been one of the few family members who had maintained regular contact with him even after his departure from royal duties, sending handwritten notes and making discreet phone calls that had meant more to Harry than she could have known. "What kind of arrangements?" Harry asked, his voice barely concealing the emotion that always accompanied thoughts of his grandmother. Charles began to explain the discovery of the codicil, speaking slowly and carefully as he outlined the trust, the conditions, and the role his mother had envisioned for her grandson's future. With each detail, Harry felt his understanding of his grandmother's wisdom deepen, even as he struggled to process the implications of her final gift. The financial independence the trust offered was significant, but it was the nature of the proposed role that truly captured Harry's imagination. A roving ambassador for the Commonwealth, working with developing nations on issues like mental health, veterans affairs, and youth development, it was everything he had hoped to accomplish as a working royal, but with the freedom to operate according to his own conscience and principles. "She thought of everything, didn't she?" Harry said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he contemplated his grandmother's continuing influence on his life. "She always did," Charles replied, his own voice betraying the grief he still carried. "Even in her final months, when we thought she was focused entirely on preparing William for his eventual role, she was quietly orchestrating something for you. Something that honored both your independence and your heritage." Harry stood and walked to the window of his home office, looking out at the California landscape that had become his sanctuary. The rolling hills and distant mountains represented everything he had gained by leaving royal life, but his father's call reminded him of everything he had lost as well. What would this role actually entail? Harry asked, his practical nature asserting itself despite his emotional response to his grandmother's gesture. Charles explained the details as they had been outlined in the Queen's letter and the accompanying legal documents. The position would require Harry to spend several months each year visiting Commonwealth nations, focusing particularly on countries where his military experience, charitable background, and status as a younger member of the royal family would create unique opportunities for connection and influence. The role came with complete autonomy over how Harry approached his assignments, with the understanding that he would represent the Crown's values while being free to address issues and support causes that aligned with his personal convictions. There would be no requirement to return to Britain for ceremonial duties, no expectation that he would resume a place in the formal hierarchy of royal precedence. "It's almost too good to be true," Harry admitted, his voice carrying years of accumulated caution about offers that seemed designed to draw him back into a life he had deliberately left behind. "Your grandmother was many things, but she was never naive," Charles observed. "She understood exactly what she was proposing and why it would work. She believed that your unique perspective, someone who had been inside the institution and chosen to leave, would give you credibility in ways that traditional royal representatives could never achieve." Harry absorbed this insight, recognizing the truth in his grandmother's assessment. His departure from royal duties had been painful, but it had also provided him with experiences and perspectives that no other member of the family possessed. He understood the cost of choosing principle over protocol, of prioritizing family over institution, of building a life based on personal values rather than inherited expectations. "There's something else," Charles continued, his voice growing even more tentative. "The Queen included a personal letter for you as well. The trustees have been instructed to deliver it only if you express interest in considering the role." The mention of a personal message from his grandmother caused Harry's breath to catch in his throat. Throughout his life, her letters had been sources of wisdom, comfort, and gentle guidance during his most difficult moments. The thought that she had prepared final words specifically for him, written during her last months while knowing she would not live to see his response, was almost overwhelming. "I don't know what to say," Harry admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything right now, Charles replied gently. This is not a decision that requires immediate action. The trust and the position will remain available indefinitely, waiting for whenever you might be ready to consider them. Harry appreciated his father's restraint, recognizing how difficult it must be for the king to resist pushing for a quick resolution to their family's estrangement. The old Charles might have pressed for immediate answers, might have framed the offer in terms of duty and obligation rather than choice and opportunity. May I discuss this with Meghan? Harry asked, knowing that any decision of this magnitude would require the support and understanding of his wife. Of course, Charles replied without hesitation. Your grandmother specifically mentioned that any role you might accept must work for your entire family, not just for you. She understood that your marriage and children were central to your happiness, and she had no desire to create circumstances that might compromise either. This detail, perhaps more than any other, demonstrated the depth of his grandmother's understanding of Harry's situation. She had recognized that his departure from royal life had been motivated not by selfishness or rebellion, but by a desire to protect his family while remaining true to his principles. As the conversation drew to a close, both men seemed reluctant to end this first genuine connection they had shared in years. The discovery of the Queen's codicil had created space for healing that neither had known how to create on their own. Harry, Charles said as they prepared to say goodbye, regardless of what you decide about your grandmother's proposal, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become and the family you've built. Your mother would be extraordinarily proud as well. The mention of Diana brought tears to Harry's eyes, as it always did, but, for the first time in years, those tears were accompanied by a sense that his parents' love for him remained constant despite the geography and disagreements that had separated him from his father. Thank you, Papa, Harry replied, the childhood nickname flowing naturally despite the formal tone their conversation had maintained. I love you too. After ending the call, Harry sat in his office for a long time, processing everything his father had shared. Outside, the California sunshine painted everything in golden hues, but his thoughts were drawn across an ocean to the country he still considered home, despite everything that had happened. For the first time since leaving Britain, Harry allowed himself to imagine a future that honored both the life he had built in America and the heritage he had never truly wanted to abandon. His grandmother, even in death, had found a way to offer him something he had thought was lost forever, a path back to service that didn't require him to compromise his hard-won independence or his family's well-being. The decision ahead was complex, involving considerations that extended far beyond his own desires. But, as Harry contemplated his grandmother's final gift, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the possibility of representing his country again, this time on his own terms and according to his own convictions. The healing his grandmother had orchestrated was already beginning, one carefully planned revelation at a time. The revelation about Queen Elizabeth's secret codicil had created an atmosphere of anticipation and possibility that stretched across continents and through the highest levels of the British establishment. In the days following Charles's phone call to his son, word of the Queen's extraordinary final gesture began to circulate among the small circle of senior royal advisors, former prime ministers, and Commonwealth leaders who had been entrusted with knowledge of the arrangement. At Buckingham Palace, the King's private office operated with unusual energy as staff members prepared briefing documents that might be needed if Prince Harry chose to accept his grandmother's offer. Constitutional experts were quietly consulted about the precedent of a non-working royal serving as an official Commonwealth representative, while security professionals began preliminary assessments of the protection requirements such a role would entail. The complexity of the situation was not lost on anyone involved. Harry's departure from royal duties had been accompanied by the removal of his official protection, a decision that had created ongoing tension between the family and raised questions about his safety during any future visits to Britain. The Queen's proposal would necessarily involve restoring some level of official security, but in a manner that recognized his unique status as someone who was simultaneously outside the traditional royal hierarchy yet representing the crown in an official capacity. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry and Meghan found themselves engaged in the kind of deep, searching conversations that had characterized the most important decisions of their marriage. The choice before them was unlike any they had faced before, offering a path that could fulfill Harry's desire for meaningful service while respecting the independence they had fought so hard to establish. Meghan's response to the news had been characteristically thoughtful and strategic. Her experience in public life, both as an actress and as a working royal, had given her valuable perspective on the opportunities and pitfalls that came with high-profile roles. She understood better than most the way such positions could consume entire families, drawing them into cycles of obligation and expectation that became increasingly difficult to escape. The question isn't whether this is a generous offer, Meghan observed during one of their evening discussions, as they sat in their garden watching their children play in the fading California light. The question is whether we can accept it without compromising everything we've built here. Harry appreciated his wife's ability to cut through emotional considerations and focus on practical realities. The life they had created in California was more than just a retreat from royal obligations, it was a carefully constructed sanctuary that allowed their family to develop relationships, pursue interests, and engage with the world according to their own values rather than institutional expectations. Yet Harry couldn't shake the feeling that his grandmother's proposal represented something more significant than just another royal role. During his years away from official duties, he had often felt like his unique experiences and perspectives were being wasted, that his understanding of both the strengths and limitations of the monarchy could serve a valuable purpose if properly channeled. The mental health advocacy work he had pursued independently had been personally fulfilling but necessarily limited in scope. The Commonwealth ambassador role would provide a platform for addressing these issues on a global scale, potentially reaching millions of people who were struggling with challenges he understood intimately. As they continued their discussions, Harry and Meghan began to envision how such a role might actually function. The Queen's codicil had been deliberately vague about specific requirements, but it had emphasized flexibility and autonomy in ways that suggested she understood the need for Harry to approach the position according to his own instincts and expertise. They imagined Harry spending time in countries like Jamaica, where his military background and informal approach to royal protocol had always been particularly well received, or in African nations where his conservation work and understanding of post-colonial dynamics could contribute to meaningful partnerships between Britain and its former colonies. The prospect of working with veterans in Commonwealth countries, drawing on his own military experience and his advocacy for wounded warriors, held particular appeal. Harry's founding of the Invictus Games had demonstrated his ability to create programs that genuinely changed lives while enhancing Britain's reputation abroad. A formal Commonwealth role would provide resources and access that could dramatically expand such initiatives. 2 weeks after his father's initial call, Harry received a package from the trustees of his grandmother's estate. Inside was an envelope bearing his name and the Queen's familiar handwriting, along with a comprehensive briefing document outlining the practical details of the proposed role. Harry opened his grandmother's letter with hands that trembled slightly, knowing that these would be among the last words she had specifically intended for him. The letter was longer than he had expected, filled with observations and insights that demonstrated just how carefully she had considered his situation and his character. "My dearest Harry," the letter began, "if you are reading these words, then you are considering a path back to service that I have designed specifically for you and your unique gifts. I want you to know that this proposal comes not from a desire to bring you back into the traditional royal fold, but from my recognition that you have something special to offer the world, something that could be diminished if forced into conventional structures." The Queen went on to describe her observations of Harry's natural ability to connect with people who felt marginalized or forgotten by traditional institutions. She had witnessed his work with veterans, his advocacy for mental health awareness, and his efforts to address issues of social justice and equality with a perspective that she believed was both authentically royal and genuinely progressive. "You have inherited the best qualities of both your parents," she wrote. "Your father's deep sense of duty and your mother's compassionate heart, combined with an independence of spirit that is entirely your own. This role would allow you to honor all of these aspects of your character without requiring you to compromise your principles or your family's well-being." The letter included specific examples of situations where Harry's involvement could make a meaningful difference. The Queen had identified particular Commonwealth nations where traditional diplomatic approaches had proven insufficient, where Harry's reputation as someone who had chosen principle over privilege could open doors that remained closed to conventional royal representatives. She had also anticipated potential concerns about the role becoming a pathway back to the constraints Harry had deliberately escaped. "This position comes with no expectation of eventual return to Britain or resumption of traditional royal duties," she wrote. "It is designed to complement the life you have built, not replace it. You would remain free to speak your conscience, support causes you believe in, and raise your children according to your own values." The briefing documents provided even more specific details about how the role would function practically. Harry would be expected to undertake 3 or 4 major missions per year, each lasting between 2 and 4 weeks. He would have complete autonomy in selecting his support staff and would work directly with Commonwealth governments and international organizations rather than through traditional Foreign Office channels. The financial arrangements were structured to ensure that Harry's independence remained intact. Rather than receiving payment from the British government, his expenses would be covered by the trust his grandmother had established, eliminating any perception that he was profiting from his royal connections or that his advocacy work was compromised by financial considerations. Most importantly, the role came with explicit protection for his family's privacy and security. Meghan and the children would never be required to participate in official functions, and Harry's travel schedule would be designed around his responsibilities as a husband and father rather than the other way around. As Harry finished reading both his grandmother's letter and the accompanying documents, he felt a profound sense of recognition. She had somehow found a way to address every concern that had driven him away from royal life while creating opportunities for the kind of meaningful service he had always wanted to pursue. The emotional weight of his grandmother's final gift was overwhelming, but it was the practical elegance of her solution that truly impressed him. She had understood that his departure from royal duties had not been a rejection of service itself, but a rejection of service that came at the cost of his authenticity and his family's well-being. That evening, as Harry and Meghan discussed the details of the proposal, they found themselves imagining a future that seemed almost too good to be true. The possibility of Harry representing Britain and the Commonwealth in a way that honored his heritage while respecting his independence felt like the answer to prayers they had not even known they were praying. She really did think of everything, Meghan observed, her voice filled with admiration for the woman who had managed to find common ground between seemingly irreconcilable positions. That's what made her such an extraordinary queen, Harry replied. She never stopped looking for solutions, even when everyone else had given up hope. The decision they faced was still complex, involving considerations that extended far beyond their immediate family to include the broader implications for the monarchy, the Commonwealth, and the causes they had committed themselves to supporting. But, for the first time since leaving Britain, Harry felt genuinely optimistic about the possibility of bridging the gap between his past and his future. His grandmother had offered him something precious, a chance to honor his heritage while remaining true to his convictions, to serve his country while protecting his family, and to use his unique position in ways that could genuinely make the world a better place. The conversation with his father had planted seeds of healing that were already beginning to grow. Now his grandmother's final gift promised to nurture those seeds into something that could benefit not just his family, but millions of people across the Commonwealth who deserved representatives who understood both privilege and sacrifice, tradition and change, loyalty and independence. As Harry contemplated the path forward, he realized that his grandmother had given him something even more valuable than a new role or financial security. She had provided him with a way to honor both his mother's memory and his father's love while building a legacy that was authentically his own. The healing she had orchestrated was about to enter its most crucial phase, with consequences that would reshape the royal family's future for generations to come. The weeks that followed Harry's receipt of his grandmother's personal letter were marked by a series of careful, discreet conversations that slowly began to reshape the landscape of the British royal family. Word of the Queen's extraordinary final gift had begun to circulate among a select group of senior royals, government ministers, and Commonwealth leaders, each of whom brought their own perspective to the unprecedented situation. Prince William's reaction to the news had been complex and deeply personal. As the heir to the throne, he understood better than anyone the delicate balance required to maintain the monarchy's relevance while honoring its traditions. His relationship with Harry had been strained by years of public disagreements and private hurt, but the discovery of their grandmother's careful planning had forced him to reconsider his brother's role in the family's future. During a private dinner at Kensington Palace, William discussed the situation with Catherine, whose perspective had always been valued for its combination of discretion and insight. As someone who had married into the royal family as an adult, she understood both the challenges of adapting to royal life and the importance of finding authentic ways to contribute to the monarchy's mission. Perhaps this is exactly what Harry needs, Catherine observed thoughtfully. A way to channel his passion for service without feeling constrained by protocols that don't suit his temperament. He's always done his best work when he's been given freedom to innovate. William nodded, remembering his brother's remarkable success with initiatives like the Invictus Games and his mental health advocacy. Harry's departure from royal duties had deprived the monarchy of one of its most effective advocates for causes that resonated with younger generations, particularly veterans' issues and mental health awareness. The question is whether he'll trust us enough to try again, William said quietly. So much damage has been done on both sides. Even if this role is perfectly designed for him, he might not believe that the family won't eventually try to change the terms or pull him back into traditional expectations. This concern was shared by many of the royal advisors who were beginning to plan for the possibility of Harry's return to official duties. The prince's departure had been accompanied by such public acrimony that rebuilding trust would require more than just elegant legal arrangements, it would demand genuine changes in how the royal family approached relationships and obligations. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry was engaged in his own process of consultation and reflection. The practical details of his grandmother's proposal had proven to be even more generous and well-considered than he had initially realized. The trust she had established was not just substantial in financial terms, but structured in ways that would allow him to support causes and initiatives that aligned perfectly with his personal convictions. The list of potential Commonwealth assignments that had been prepared by the Queen's advisors read like a catalogue of Harry's deepest interests and expertise. There were opportunities to work with veterans organizations in Australia and New Zealand, mental health initiatives in Caribbean nations, conservation programs throughout Africa, and youth development projects in countries across Asia and the Pacific. Each potential assignment came with detailed briefing materials that demonstrated the Queen's team had been planning this role for months, possibly years, before her death. The level of preparation was extraordinary, involving consultations with Commonwealth governments, international organizations, and local advocacy groups who had specifically requested the kind of support that Harry's unique background and perspective could provide. One particular briefing document caught Harry's attention immediately. It outlined a potential partnership with several African nations to develop programs supporting young people who had been affected by conflict, drawing on Harry's military experience and his understanding of trauma recovery. The project would involve working directly with local organizations while providing a platform for sharing successful approaches across the Commonwealth. The scope and ambition of such work excited Harry in ways he hadn't experienced since his military service. The role his grandmother had designed would allow him to operate at the intersection of official diplomacy and grassroots advocacy, using his royal platform to amplify voices that were often overlooked by traditional international development efforts. As Harry and Meghan continued to discuss the implications of accepting the role, they found themselves planning not just for Harry's travel and commitments, but for ways that their entire family could contribute to the mission his grandmother had envisioned. Meghan's experience with advocacy work and her understanding of media dynamics could provide valuable support for initiatives that required public engagement and awareness raising. Their children, while still very young, could grow up with an understanding of service that was both deeply rooted in royal tradition and authentically connected to modern challenges. The role would provide them with opportunities to learn about the Commonwealth and its diverse cultures while seeing their father engaged in meaningful work that made a genuine difference in people's lives. The security considerations that had been such a contentious issue during Harry's transition away from royal duties were addressed comprehensively in his grandmother's arrangements. The trust would fund appropriate protection for Harry during his official travels, while respecting the family's privacy during their time in California. The arrangements were designed to provide safety without surveillance, protection without intrusion. 3 weeks after receiving his grandmother's letter, Harry made a decision that surprised even himself with its clarity and conviction. During a video call with his father, he formally accepted the role of Commonwealth ambassador, with the understanding that the position would begin with a trial period that would allow all parties to assess how well the arrangement worked in practice. "I want to honor Granny's vision," Harry said during the call, his voice carrying a mixture of determination and emotion. "But I also want to make sure that this really can work for everyone involved. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right." Charles's relief was evident even through the digital connection. The king had spent weeks wondering whether his son would be able to trust the family enough to accept what was genuinely intended as a gift without strings attached. Harry's willingness to move forward represented not just an acceptance of his grandmother's offer, but a tentative first step toward healing relationships that had been damaged by years of misunderstanding and hurt. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Charles said softly. "She always believed that your experiences, both positive and difficult, had prepared you for something special. This role will allow you to use everything you've learned in service of causes that matter to you and countries that need what you have to offer." The announcement of Harry's new role was carefully planned to emphasize the unique nature of the position and its independence from traditional royal hierarchies. Rather than being framed as a return to royal duties, it was presented as an innovative approach to Commonwealth engagement that recognized the value of diverse perspectives and experiences within the broader royal family. The reaction from Commonwealth leaders was overwhelmingly positive. Many had specifically requested the kind of engagement that Harry's role would provide, representation that came with royal prestige but without the formal constraints that often limited traditional diplomatic initiatives. Harry's reputation for authenticity and his willingness to address difficult topics made him particularly well-suited for work in countries where trust in traditional institutions had been eroded by historical injustices or contemporary challenges. The British public's response was more complex, reflecting the polarized opinions that had developed around Harry's departure from royal duties. However, even critics of his previous decisions acknowledged that the role offered potential benefits for Britain's international relationships, particularly with younger demographics who valued authenticity and social justice advocacy. Perhaps most importantly, the announcement began a process of healing within the royal family itself. William issued a public statement expressing support for his brother's new role and pride in their grandmother's wisdom in creating such an opportunity. The statement was carefully crafted to acknowledge past difficulties while emphasizing shared commitments to service and the Commonwealth's future. Harry has always had a unique gift for connecting with people who feel overlooked or forgotten, William's statement read. This role will allow him to use that gift in service of the Commonwealth while honoring our grandmother's vision of a monarchy that remains relevant and responsive to changing times. The private conversations between the brothers that followed the public announcements were tentative but genuinely hopeful. Years of accumulated hurt could not be erased overnight, but the framework their grandmother had created provided space for rebuilding trust and finding common ground in their shared commitment to meaningful service. As Harry began preparing for his first official mission as Commonwealth ambassador, he felt a profound sense of coming full circle. The path his grandmother had created allowed him to honor his heritage while remaining true to his convictions, to serve his country while protecting his family, and to use his unique experiences in ways that could genuinely improve lives around the world. The healing process she had orchestrated was entering its most crucial phase, with the potential to transform not just Harry's relationship with his family, but the monarchy's relationship with the Commonwealth and the world. Her final gift was proving to be everything she had intended, a bridge between tradition and innovation, duty and autonomy, past and future. The first test of this carefully constructed arrangement would come within months, as Harry prepared to undertake missions that would demonstrate whether his grandmother's vision could translate into meaningful change for the causes and communities that needed it most. The stakes were high, but the foundation she had laid was strong enough to support not just Harry's return to service, but a new model for how the royal family could engage with an evolving world while remaining true to its core values and traditions. 6 months after accepting his role as Commonwealth ambassador, Prince Harry stood on the grounds of a veterans rehabilitation center in Kingston, Jamaica, watching wounded soldiers participate in adaptive sports training that would eventually lead them to international competition. The scene before him was a perfect embodiment of everything his grandmother had envisioned when she crafted his unique position, meaningful service that drew on his personal experiences while advancing Britain's relationships with Commonwealth nations. The success of Harry's first several missions had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. His visit to New Zealand had resulted in groundbreaking partnerships between British and New Zealand organizations focused on mental health awareness among young people. In Australia, his work with Indigenous communities had opened new avenues for dialogue about reconciliation and healing. Each assignment had demonstrated the wisdom of the Queen's insight that Harry's unique perspective could accomplish things that traditional diplomatic approaches could not achieve. Standing beside him in Jamaica was Prime Minister Andrew Holness, whose initial skepticism about the value of royal visits had been transformed by Harry's approach to engagement. Rather than the ceremonial appearances that had characterized previous royal tours, Harry had spent his time in substantive meetings with local organizations, policy discussions with government officials, and hands-on participation in programs designed to address real challenges facing Jamaican society. Your Highness, Prime Minister Holness said, using the title that Harry had initially been reluctant to employ in his new role, what we've accomplished this week has changed my understanding of how the Commonwealth can function in the modern world. This is partnership, not patronage. Harry smiled, recognizing the distinction the Prime Minister was making. Throughout his missions as Commonwealth ambassador, he had been careful to approach each assignment as an opportunity to learn and collaborate rather than to provide solutions from the outside. His grandmother's instructions had been clear on this point. His role was to facilitate connections and support local initiatives, not to impose British perspectives on complex local challenges. The transformation in Harry's relationship with his role, his family, and his sense of purpose had been remarkable to witness. Meghan had accompanied him on this Jamaica mission, their first official joint appearance since accepting his grandmother's offer. Her presence had added depth and perspective to their engagements, particularly in discussions about women's leadership and entrepreneurship that drew on her own professional experience and advocacy work. The sight of Harry and Meghan working together in an official capacity, representing the crown while maintaining their authentic voices and perspectives, had captured global attention in ways that surprised even experienced royal watchers. Their approach to the role seemed to embody a new model for royal service, one that honored tradition while embracing contemporary values and methods. As the Jamaica mission drew to a close, Harry received a video call from his father, who had been following media coverage of the trip with growing pride and satisfaction. The transformation in their relationship over the past months had been as significant as Harry's professional success. Regular conversations, built around Harry's work and experiences as Commonwealth ambassador, had gradually rebuilt trust and understanding between father and son. The reports from Jamaica have been extraordinary, King Charles said during their call, his voice carrying warmth that had been absent from their conversations for years. Prime Minister Holness specifically mentioned your approach to the veterans programs. He said you understood their challenges in ways that no previous royal representative had managed to achieve. Harry felt a deep sense of satisfaction hearing his father's praise, not because he needed approval, but because it represented genuine recognition of work that mattered to him profoundly. The veterans he had met in Jamaica faced challenges that resonated with his own experiences and those of soldiers he had served alongside in Afghanistan. Being able to use his platform to support their recovery and reintegration felt like the fulfillment of obligations he had carried since his own military service ended. The work here has been incredible, Papa, Harry replied. These programs are changing lives in ways that go far beyond what we could accomplish through traditional charitable donations or ceremonial visits. The Queen was right about the potential for this kind of engagement. The mention of his grandmother brought a moment of reflective silence to their conversation. Her presence seemed to hover over everything Harry had accomplished in his new role, as if she were still guiding his steps from beyond the grave. The wisdom of her final arrangement had become more apparent with each successful mission, each relationship rebuilt, each life touched by the work she had made possible. Beyond the professional success of his Commonwealth role, Harry had found that his grandmother's gift had facilitated healing in areas of his life he hadn't expected. His relationship with William had slowly but steadily improved, built around shared pride in the work Harry was accomplishing and genuine admiration for the way he was representing the family's values in challenging circumstances. The brothers had spoken several times during Harry's Jamaica mission, with William sharing insights from his own experiences with Caribbean leaders and offering suggestions for connecting Harry's work with ongoing initiatives supported by other members of the royal family. These conversations had been free of the tension and competitiveness that had characterized their interactions for years, replaced by a collaborative spirit that served both their individual missions and their family's broader objectives. Princess Catherine had also played a significant role in supporting Harry's transition back into official duties. Her experience balancing family life with royal obligations had provided valuable guidance as Harry and Meghan worked to establish boundaries that protected their children while allowing meaningful public service. Her warmth and practical support had helped to heal wounds that extended throughout the family system. As Harry prepared to return to California after his Jamaica mission, he reflected on the profound changes that his grandmother's final gift had brought to every aspect of his life. The financial independence provided by her trust had eliminated the stress and uncertainty that had clouded his family's future, allowing them to approach his royal duties from a position of strength rather than need. The flexibility of his role allowed him to maintain the life he and Meghan had built in Montecito while contributing to causes that aligned with their deepest values. Their children were growing up with an understanding of service that was both rooted in royal tradition and responsive to contemporary challenges, seeing their father engaged in work that made a tangible difference in people's lives. Perhaps most importantly, Harry had found a way to honor his mother's memory while building a relationship with his father based on mutual respect and shared purpose. The healing his grandmother had orchestrated had created space for conversations about Diana that had been too painful to have for years, allowing Charles and Harry to connect over their shared love for her and their determination to continue her legacy of compassionate service. The success of Harry's Commonwealth role had also begun to influence broader discussions about the monarchy's future. His innovative approach to royal duties had demonstrated that the institution could evolve and adapt without compromising its essential character or values. Young people throughout the Commonwealth had responded enthusiastically to Harry's authentic engagement style, suggesting that the monarchy's relevance to future generations might depend on its ability to embrace diverse approaches to service. As Harry's plane departed Kingston for the journey back to California, he carried with him not just the satisfaction of a successful mission, but the knowledge that his grandmother's vision was proving even more transformative than anyone had imagined. Her final gift had been about more than healing family relationships or creating opportunities for service, it had been about demonstrating the monarchy's capacity for renewal and growth. The veterans in Jamaica who would benefit from expanded support programs, the young people in New Zealand who would have access to improved mental health services, the communities throughout the Commonwealth who were beginning to see the royal family as partners rather than distant figures, all of them were inheriting a legacy of the Queen's wisdom and Harry's willingness to embrace a new model of royal service. Back in Britain, King Charles prepared for his next weekly audience with the Prime Minister, carrying reports of Harry's Jamaica success that would inform discussions about Britain's evolving relationships with Commonwealth nations. The transformation in his younger son had become a source of personal joy and professional pride, demonstrating the possibility of healing even the deepest family wounds while serving the greater good. The Queen's final lesson was now complete, its impacts rippling through the royal family, the Commonwealth, and countless individual lives that had been touched by her grandson's renewed commitment to service. She had orchestrated not just a reconciliation, but a revolution, one that honored the monarchy's past while pointing toward a future filled with possibility and hope. In death, as in life, Queen Elizabeth II had proven that the greatest royal gift was not the crown itself, but the wisdom to know how love could triumph over protocol, how healing could emerge from hurt, and how one grandmother's final act of faith could reshape a family's destiny for generations to come. The unexpected clause in her will had been about much more than money or titles or official roles. It had been about creating space for forgiveness, opportunity for growth, and a path toward a future where duty and authenticity could coexist in perfect harmony. Her legacy would live on not just in the institutions she had served, but in the transformed relationships and renewed sense of purpose that her final gift had made possible. Harry's journey from estranged family member to innovative Commonwealth ambassador was complete, but the work his grandmother had made possible was just beginning. The foundation she had laid was strong enough to support not just his individual success, but a new chapter in the royal family's long history of service, adaptation, and enduring relevance to the people they were sworn to serve.